Have you ever wanted to take a break from work, but felt like it was the wrong thing to do? Or that it was going to be impossible to stop working for a period of time? I'm so excited to share this interview with Heidi Dusek, a woman who, with her family of 5, decided to take a year off both work and traditional schooling to travel around in their RV. Heidi's story is truly inspirational, not just because she defied the odds in taking a gap year, but also because her story is so relatable. Heidi shares the fears and limiting beliefs that almost kept her from taking this transformative break. In this interview, we dig into what inspired this family gap year.
That's kind of where all this began.
We also discuss how she made it work financially.
And that was kind of the route we went, but I will say that was not easy either.
And we also talk through the money fears or limiting beliefs and the practical steps she took to overcome those things that so often hold us back.
Money was definitely a question.
If you're thinking about taking a gap year, sabbatical, or any sort of break from work, this interview is for you. I first asked Heidi to describe her trip for us. Here's what she said.
The first 3 months, we focused on skiing. So we are a downhill skiing family. All my kids have been skiing since they were young. So we went from the Midwest. We left January 19th and we went northern, Midwestern, kind of northern Rockies locations and skiing on Tuesday. I just told you, like, that was one of them. And then just figuring out how to camp in winter and not freeze up, and how do we stay warm? How do we get outside when it's cold? All those things were kind of phase 1. And then come March, we transitioned. So we cut across kind of mid-central United States and started making our way up the mid-Atlantic. And so it's funny because those seasons of travel were like seasons of life for us. It felt like we were starting a new school year, even though it was just March, right? We were in this different phase. And so that's when the kids really started immersing themselves more in this, what do I actually want to learn? What do I actually want to build? So my daughter had gotten into Greek mythology. She had read all the Percy Jackson books and wanted to create that. So that's where we went into intense projects instead of day-to-day just activities. My oldest son had started his fly tying and selling business. So for him, it was building a business and understanding e-commerce. You know what I'm saying? It was these more drawn out processes as opposed to checking a box each day. And that's where I would say we slowed down. But we didn't. Most of our experiences for the first 6 months, we stayed in a place for 3 to 5 days max. And then we would have some intense travel days in between. We did agree that travel days needed to be 4 hours or less, ideally. Our route was often determined by what did we want to do in that space? So, like I mentioned, skiing already, it may be where do we have friends? Who are the family members we want to see? On the East Coast, it was my oldest son collects Major League Baseball stadiums. Where could we go? What makes sense for us that fits our lifestyle? We still ate breakfast and dinner together, and lunch was always kind of on the go. We went to a lot of public libraries for learning time. It looked a lot like our normal life, quite honestly, just we changed locations more frequently.
More and more people are learning about the opportunities to take a break from work, whether you call that a gap year, sabbatical, or mini retirement. Yet, it's still not common. It was even less common a couple of years ago, so I asked Heidi what inspired the trip, and her response surprised me a bit.
So I think if I try to trace it back to some of the early inclinings, I had remembered a colleague of mine, her daughter was taking a gap year between her last year of college and before starting a job. And I kind of was oh, that's cool. Why didn't I know that was an option? Because I went straight in from being an overachieving. I had 23 credits one college semester, and I was I didn't know that was an option. I went right in head first into my professional career. Shoot, that's kind of what I thought. Shoot, I missed the boat. And then I had heard about all these stories of people retiring, and they do these really interesting extreme adventures. And I was okay, I guess that's what our gap year would be, like when we retire. And that's kind of what started us on the financial independence journey, thinking like, if we just hurry up and then retire, we could do these things where our kids were young. And then I was pretty clear, like, I don't want to do that either, right? Like, I don't necessarily want to hurry up and get to retirement because it just felt like we were missing out on everything we wanted right now, and our kids were still young. And then at the same time, I didn't want to wait until retirement either, so depending if we were going to go slow or fast, neither of those tracks really fit us. So it was a number of like little things, and some of the vacations that we were on were like, it just never felt like enough time, right? Like we just come down from the monotony of life on vacation, and then we were like ramping up to go back home. Like I've heard and read that you're often in the next phase of travel. Like when you're planning, you're so focused on being in the travel, and when you're in the travel, you're so focused on coming down from the travel, right? Like, and I always found myself like in this future casting mode, and when I'm coming down from travel, I'm planning the next travel, right? Like, and so I always found myself in these modes that I was like, what if we just had more time to be on vacation, or all the things that we found so magical about vacation. So that was some of the early inclinings. And I say it was like this perpetual nudge of like life, or whatever you want to call it, just telling me, I couldn't stop thinking about it, right? It was like nonstop, to the point where I was like, I either need to stop talking about this, or we just need to do it. And so then it became apparent, like, okay, if we're actually going to do this, what are all the questions that we have? What are all the reasons we shouldn't do this, or why people think we shouldn't do this? And let's start figuring that out for us.
I've worked with a number of clients who have slowed down, made a career change, or taken a break, including Heidi. The one thing I've learned is that everyone has fears and limiting beliefs that can hold them back. Heidi is no exception. When I asked Heidi about her fears, one of the first ones she identified was money.
Money was definitely a question.
But it wasn't just, how are we going to afford this? She shared a deeper script that she had bought into, that she had to work through first.
I remember having a conversation with you, actually, of how irresponsible it would be to not be making money while spending money. And that was like one massive thing that we had to work through, is if I wasn't making the same amount of money that I was in my great job, what did that look like, right? Like, what if I started spending more money than I was making? That was wrong by all standards of financial well-being. And so that was definitely, I mean, the money, I would say, was probably hard and fast in our face. But a lot of growing up, work was modeled for me, right? Like my dad always worked 2 to 3 jobs, not because we had to. I think it was just like what he had learned to do in hard times, and then he never stopped. And so for me, like there was this ethos of being hardworking meant you worked a lot of hours, and it was like the grit, like there was something character building about all of that. And so that irresponsible narrative, I think, was my own, telling me like, if you're not working, if it's not X, then it's Y, right? Like, so if you're not working, then you're lazy. Or if you're not saving money, then you're spending money. That's irresponsible. So it was me, myself, and I, quite honestly, working through like, what if I flipped that? Or what if, do you know other people that aren't working, and do I think they're lazy? Or who else do I know that are entrepreneurs, and what does their life look like? So I needed to find different examples of what that might mean, and how did I feel about others? Because often I think we're so much harsher on ourselves than we are. Like if I was sitting in a conversation with a friend, would I be saying these things? That, I think that shift really helped as well.
Heidi shared the strategies that helped her overcome this limiting belief. If limiting beliefs are holding you back from your dreams, I'll share a link to a video in the description below that covers the 6 effective strategies to overcome limiting beliefs. Once she was able to work through that limiting belief, she also talked about some of the tactical steps she took to better plan and prepare for the costs of the trip.
Most people, when they take a vacation, it's a splurge, right? So money is initially like, how can you afford to be on perpetual vacation? So that whole line of thinking needed to be, how much money are we actually spending on travel, understanding what our dollars were, and then does that have to be the case, right? So it went from everything like, okay, I should mention, my husband hadn't always traveled, so we never had a splurgy vacation. It just was very easy, low key, budget travel was probably more our jam in the early days. Our travel budget, for example, was like $2,500. And then it became like a challenge. Like, can we still do family vacations for $2,500, right? So there was a piece of me that just is drawn to that. So from a tactical perspective, the easy answer was like, well, then you just need to save enough money that you don't have to worry about spending more than you make. Like, you will have enough money already sitting there. And that was kind of the route we went. But I will say that was not easy either. Because as soon as you shift from saving mode to spending mode, all you see is like your balance is depleting slowly over time. So over gap year, that still was a hard thing. But I would say the other thing that helped ease was like, okay, so now we have a strategy. We just know we need to create a gap year fund to cover a year's worth of family expenses. So getting pretty tactical around like, but what are our expenses for a year and how much is it going to cost to travel? And also not feeling like I'm just not a great stick to a budget kind of person, right? I know roughly what we spend. We're pretty thrifty. I wasn't too worried about like blowing the budget, but I also was like, I don't want money to be the driving factor when we're on a gap year, to be like, oh, sorry, we can't afford that, or like worried about money in any way, shape, or form. So one of the things I needed to do was, before we went on gap year, I needed to have like a blowout. Like, I needed to go high end. Like, what was the top end of our budget? How would that feel? And it's so funny because it just so happened that one of our biggest tests was when summer of 2022, we were taking a 30-day sabbatical, for lack of a better word, where we were going to test a lot of the pieces that we just hadn't been able to do in the two and a half week vacations that we'd been doing so far. And one of them was our budget. I was like, okay, guys, we're going like all in, right? Not anything you wanted to do, because I wanted it to be realistic, but like, we got to get really uncomfortable with this money thing. Gas was $5.54 a liter in Canada. We have an 80-gallon tank and we get 7 miles to the gallon in an RV. Talk about like our gas budget just blowing up and being like, okay, well, that's not at all what I had budgeted, right? Like, I was more comfortable with a very lower budget in the gas department. So I was like, okay, this is really uncomfortable, but we'll figure this out. And we did. At one point we were thinking like, maybe we'll go all the way to Alaska. And clearly by the time we got to like Banff, Jasper, we're like, I think we need to slow down a little bit. Like, I think we need to sit in this discomfort for a little bit. So that was one thing. There was also like a whitewater rafting trip, and it was like $200 and some per person. And I was like, that's like $1,000 for all of us for what? A 3-hour trip. So I like started doing the math on like cost per person, per hour. Like, is this optimized? And I was like, Heidi, stop. Like, this is what we said we wanted to do. I've done all the research. This is a great opportunity. And I couldn't find another hack because I was trying to. And I was like, I'm just going to swallow this one, right? Like, we're going to do this experience and we'll see afterwards, like, was it worth it? Like, those were some of the like money-wise ways to say like, okay, top end, was it worth the money we spent? How did it feel in the moment? How did we work through that? Did we blow our budget? You know, like, it was all those things that I had been questioning up until then. And I remember like afterwards being like, we're fine, right? Like, so when we put all those numbers together, even if we had an entire year of like blowout expenses, we were still within a range that I felt like, okay, we'll just save for that amount now. And it was maybe like $15,000 more, which seems like a lot, but when in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that much. That was probably two years ago. We still talk about it, right? Like, when I talk about which pictures from gap year do we want to put up on the wall, the kids are talking about like the time in Jasper, and I was like, or the time in Banff when we went whitewater rafting, and I was like, well, technically that wasn't our gap year, but oh well. You know, like, that demonstrates to me like, yeah, that one was worth it.
The thing I love about Heidi's approach is her commitment to experimentation. They took multiple smaller trips before taking the gap year to understand the costs. But it wasn't just Heidi making these decisions. Heidi's married, has 3 school-aged kids, and a dog. The decision to take a gap year wasn't just hers, but her whole family's. And working through their concerns was also a big part of preparing for the trip. One of the biggest concerns that her children had was about schooling.
So when we started talking about extended periods of time being gone, not over the summer, that came out loud and clear. Like, what does school look like? And I don't want to homeschool. And what if I fall behind? Yeah, I mean, those were all valid concerns, right? I couldn't say well, that's not a problem, right? I needed for them to believe like, no, this'll work. And I believe and trust the process because I had done the work, right? But nobody else had done the work.
Heidi describes 2 separate events that gave her the confidence to pull her kids out of school. The first is when they were buying the RV.
My husband's a teacher, so I should mention that too. So we didn't have a lot of opportunities to test things during non-travel season. And that was part of the impetus is like, we want to experience things when we're not like in the heat of tourism season. But being that he was a teacher, he had very little flexibility to do those things in like shoulder season. So in March of 2021, we were buying an RV. And as it turned out, because of my husband's schedule, we all flew down on a one-way ticket to Florida because that's where the RV was that we were going to be buying. And we bought the RV and he had to fly back and work for like 4 days before like the official spring break started. And I was with the kids by myself and I was like, I'm like stuck in an RV. This is kind of an unexpected experience of how we could test one. For me, it was working remotely. And for them, it was like, what might school look like in an RV on the road? And that example was like perfect. It was, the kids had the materials from their teachers. They were like helping each other. They were all interested in things. They had the flexibility to like choose what to work on in the morning. They could take breaks and go outside and play while I was still working. And then collectively at the end of the day, we would go do something fun as a family. And I was like, oh, that was like dream life right there, right? Everything worked perfectly. There were no flaws. So that was like, okay, maybe schooling could work, right? I think it gave them a little bit of confidence.
The second was when her daughter got into an accident.
And then kind of an unfortunate thing also happened. My daughter had an accident and broke both arms. So she was in casts from like here to here in both arms. And we were like, she can't take care of herself. Like she can't go to the bathroom by herself. I'm like, I'm not sending her to school while she's in full arm casts for 9 weeks. So that was a fascinating experiment too, because now I was like, well, I guess here's another unexpected like testing opportunity. And the crazy thing is she got to choose. She had a couple things like the teachers would send home and stuff with her, but for the most part, she got to choose what she wanted to work on. And she started reading Harry Potter. And in 9 weeks, I think she read 6 Harry Potter books, maybe 4. I don't remember the exact number, but like submersed herself in Harry Potter. And she went back to school after she was all better, bones healed, everything was good. She goes back to school, she takes her reading scores, and she is now the top of the class. Not just like doing well, but like exceptional. Like this growth was massive. And I was like, I have no idea if that culminating event was her breaking her arms and then just like immersing herself in reading. But clearly she didn't lose anything in that 9-week gap that she missed school. I think I had to release the idea of what achievement or success looks like in education and schooling, and to have them be bought in the process through all these different experiments. I think they started to realize this is probably going to be way more informative, experiential, enriching than anything. Because I asked them the next, like when we were on our home scale, I was like, so what'd you guys learn last year? Or, like what was the most exciting thing from 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, whatever grade they were in at that point? And they were like, I don't really know. Like, I don't really remember anything that like stood out in my mind. And now I would, like one of the challenges, I'm like, ask my kids what they learned. They'll tell you, right? Like they all had their own experiences and they got to design them and they got to build businesses and they got to essentially choose whatever they wanted to work on and go deep. And I think it's pretty fascinating, quite honestly.
Taking a gap year can be a truly transformative experience. One thing that people don't talk about is how it can change how you look at life and what you value most. Here's what Heidi had to say about returning from their trip.
So I think the other piece of this that is really tricky is home is still home. And it comes with a lot of experiences. A lot of people that we love are here. And they all are so excited for us, right? But when you go through an extremely intense, deep, transformational experience, it's not great for small talk. When people are like, so how was gap year? And you're like, amazing? Like, I don't even know where to begin with that. And I think there's this tension of like, I don't know how to talk about it. Like, we went through all these really cool things. We had these really hard challenges that we worked through. We learned so much about who we are as individuals and who we are as a family. I can't articulate that in like a paragraph even. Or when someone's like, what was your favorite place? I'm like, I want to know, why are you asking me that question before I figure out how to answer? Because if you're just looking for like a list of places that you think you should go, you probably won't have the same experience, because the way we traveled isn't the same as like a vacation. It had more to do with the people that we met, or like the silly stories of what we saw or experienced there. I don't know why you're asking me that question, right? But it's also like, on the flip side of that, I also know like, what questions do you ask then, right? So I don't want to come across as, I don't know, there's this like mental gymnastics I'm finding that we're all experiencing. We don't know how to talk about this yet, because eventually people grow tired of hearing your amazing stories and they just want to get back to normal. They just want you to fall in line and be like, okay, great, that was a great chapter, you know? And that is where I don't know how this is all going to work. You know, like the inertia of American life can pull you back into the busy, right? And I think we have been so thoughtful. I don't know if that's the right word, but like, how do we protect what we had, right? Like, how do we resist that urge to just like go back and let everything go from what we experienced? So, you know, cautious of how do we protect our family time? What do we say yes to? Now that we're home, it's even harder than, you know, that was a lot easier when we were gone.
I asked Heidi what advice she would have for others who are considering a similar decision.
The strongest motivator behind this is that there's no one way to do a gap year, right? What worked for me and what made sense for us was deeply personal. I was very careful not to ask advice right away. I wanted to find other people that were doing this, learn from them, listen to them, and figure out like what parts of that story might fit us, or like what might we want to take from this. And it was through that community building experience though that we built like really deep relationships, and we were able to like crowdsource stories. And so I think just getting really personal with yourself, like what is the reason you want to do this? What are the possibilities you're most excited about? And then finding people who've done that and learn from them. I think that's probably the piece that was most powerful in building confidence. And, you know, like once you open up a relationship, like you can't like quantify what that will mean for you, right? Like you can leverage things differently. It'll open up new resources, other connections. And so I had probably underestimated how powerful those relationships and those communities would be throughout this entire process. So it was like a slow, steady seed that just kept getting like watered every time I had those conversations.
Are you thinking about taking a gap year or similar break from work? If so, let us know in the comments below. Heidi and her family were in the process of settling back at home when I interviewed her. I asked Heidi if there was anything else she was looking forward to. Here's what she said.
Quickly became clear, like there were people that wanted to hear this story, and yet a part of this was super sacred. Like I didn't want to share, and it's a lot of work, right? Because instead of spending time with my kids, I'm now like, what am I putting on social media today, or whatever that was? And so I kind of decided, you know what, this is a story that I'm just going to journal about right now, and know that there's going to be a book that comes out later. So I will say I didn't really answer your question on what's next, but I am writing the book, the memoir of our gap year, really on the lessons. It's more for my kids than anything, quite honestly, to say like, this is what we learned and look at the amazing transformations that have happened, but also like deeply tell the story, because I have 5 journals. I have tens of thousands of pictures and videos and a calendar of what we did. Like I have all these things, and there's no easy way to tell the story without just writing the book. So that's kind of what's to come.
Heidi, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing part of your story here on the YouTube channel. I know many of us will be looking forward to reading the book when it comes out. If you enjoyed this interview, you might also appreciate watching these other interviews where we talk to ordinary people making intentional decisions to live extraordinary lives today. And as always, thanks for watching and enjoy the journey.